Well, I'm finally getting around to filming a little bit on how we constructed these. People always ask me if I have the dimensions and everything, and I really don't. When we built this, it took us a couple of months to design and build this whole thing, and we did not dream we would have a YouTube channel. We were just doing it to grow vegetables. So we didn't keep track of details, and as I've farther into it, I don't think you really need too many details about it, because I'll just tell you some of the things that we have learned and give you an idea of what we've done, but you'll need to adjust to your own circumstances. We first started out building this section here on the patio because it always got sun, and so we built it, and we built it originally with just a single 2x6 on both sides of the pipes. Here in Arizona, it's so dry that the wood is so wet, they just warp so quickly that it just turned out disastrous. So then we decided to go with 4x4s, which we did on the rest of our build. The only problem with that, we had to do 2x4s, and they were too thick, and so on. The main thing in your construction is making certain that the top of the board and the top of the pipe are level. If your pipe is too low, your net cups won't go down far enough. If it's too high, then the tubs will rock on top. It needs to be level. And we didn't do it on this first build, but we've learned, lay the pipe straight on top of that cross beam. Just lay it on it, it'll hold it, and then without having to do all the trimming and messing around to get even with this build, we also found that these warped as well. So that didn't solve the problem, and it was much harder to build. My recommendation when you build this is to do this. We came back and readjusted. That's why you can see these spots in the top of the pipes. We originally had tall 3.5 gallon containers in here, and they were closer together. We had more of them, but they were just too hard to grow. The output, the production on the tomatoes were only half of, or was only half of what it was in these other tubs. And we like the oblong and the square part. It's easier, as you see, our cages fit perfectly, these bigger cages right inside, so that this is what we went to. So rather than having to buy all new pipe and everything, we decided we would just adjust, and we re-drilled holes, and we used those pieces that we drilled out to epoxy back in these spots, and it's worked just fine. They don't leak, and they keep out the light and everything. So that's worked all right. But now back to the construction. Because the single 2x6 warped so much, and the 4x4s warped, we've gone back to the idea of putting two 2x6s. Now this section here that we're looking at is 10 feet long. They come in 10-foot lengths or 8-foot lengths. The pipe comes in 10-foot lengths, so that worked out great. So you can use that to help decide. Now these others are 15 feet long over here, so we had to put a union in between to extend them longer, and we had to figure out how to splice. We tried it different ways, but the best way is to splice it like this. We cut them to 7.5 feet and spliced them right over top of that 4x4 crossbeam, and it made it much, much stronger. And we used Craig screws to drill them in and hold them. So if you have long ones, that's what you'll have to do, is you'll have to have a crossbeam where they meet so that it will support. Anyway, back to the 2x6s. What happens with lumber, if they're Oh, got my finger in the way. If there are two boards together, they will help control each other. One will keep the other, and they won't bow in the same place. So what we would recommend, and what we did here, is we took two 2x6s and put them glued in between and drilled screws to hold them together. That way it keeps them straight. They help keep each other in line, and this has worked much better. The other advantage to that is a 2x6, as you know, is not actually 2x6. It's about 5.5, but that's still too much to match up with the top of that pipe. So you'll have to measure what that would be, and you'll take probably approximately an inch off of this bottom edge here. And the way you would do that, it makes it easy, because if you have a table saw, you can put the whole things in and rip them. Make sure you don't have screws out that far, but rip them to the depth of the pipe. That is so important. They have to be even. The other thing is, if you have what they call a skill saw, hand saw, you could run down the edge and cut off an inch or whatever you determine will match your boards to your pipe. That's the critical part. So if I was building them again, I would do it just what I've told you. Take two 2x6, glue and screw them together, and then rip one edge down to the height of the pipe. Now, just a couple of other things about that. I think that covers it. That's what I'd recommend. If you weld and you want to do it that way, I had one guy tour the garden and he said, well, I weld, I'm going to build it out of metal. Fine. I couldn't. So I used what I could do. The other thing is maybe a little dimensions. They wonder, how high are they? Well, our ground slopes, you probably can't see for sure, but it slopes from up to the top down to here. So there's at least 2 or 3 inches difference there in the height than down here. So the height from the ground to the top of the tub is anywhere from 28 to 30 inches. Doesn't have to be exact. That matched this group over here, which we built first, so we had to make these the same height. The reason we like them this high is because my wife does a lot of the gardening and she's much shorter. And so it's the right height for her. For me, when I spend much time here, I'm taller. I'm 6 inches taller, and I get a little crink in my back from bending over a lot. So you have to decide how tall you are. That's why I don't think it's so important what we did. It's what fits you and your frame and your circumstances. So the height overall from the ground to the top of the is about 28 to 30 inches. You'll have to make sure, well, it's so hard to keep organized, but we had cinder blocks in here, and what I had to have, because of my age, I was 78 when we did this, I had to have somebody come in and level all these, and I had gauges to show them where to put them and what level and so on. They went through and leveled them. So the idea, to make this system work, they all have to be level if you're running them off that float. Whatever group of building sections you have, if you want them to run off one float, they all have to be level. So level the ground, level the blocks under them first. Make sure they're on solid footing, and then when they are all level, then you build the other part to be the height that you want from there. So you'll just have to kind of figure that out, but it's, like I say, 28 to 30 inches from the ground. So the supports are not quite that long. They're shorter because you got to take into consideration the 4x4 across the top. This from this edge to this outside edge is 32 inches. That's what we would recommend. It gives more room down the middle for plants to overhang and so on. As you notice over in this next section, they do cross over some, but that seems to give it plenty of room for 32 inches from outside to outside of the wood. Now, as you can see, the tubs stick out, so you won't have 32 inches in between. You almost have 4 inches narrower on the top. So if you're wanting to get a wheelchair down in there, or a wheelbarrow, or anything like that, these are only, what, 26 inches? 26 inches between the wood. Well, up here they're 22 inches. And when they start to get big and come out into the thing, like we had pak choi and stuff this winter, it's hard to walk down between here and broccoli because they get so big. I would recommend that you'd have at least 32 inches between them, maybe 3 feet if you have the room, so that you can get up and down with a wheelbarrow if you need to, or any way to work. It's just easier. Because we were measuring out our whole backyard, I didn't want to give up 1 extra or 2 extra tubes of growing, so we put ours a little closer. So you'll just have to work it out. That's why it's so important to realize that you will need to adapt to your area. If you only need 1 or 2 pipes, don't worry about all this. Just build them how high you want and put a float in. And you can even put a float in each one at the end if you're wanting, but I think that's a waste. I'd rather level sections so I can run off 1 float. From that, I would just say that's the lesson we learned over here, to glue and screw together so they don't warp. And you adapt to your needs. How high do you need it? If you're 6'6", you'll probably want it up higher than this. You have to remember, though, that these tomatoes, these are peppers, but the tomatoes will get up this high. And so if you're not very tall, it's going to be tough reaching up 6 inches or 8 inches above the top of the cages to get to the tomatoes. So I hope this answers it. I've tried to think of every possibility, but the main thing is how to screw them together, how to rip them to get them the exact height of your pipe, and adapt it otherwise, the height to your height, the spacing to what your needs are, and I think you'll have success. So if you have any questions, just let me know. Thanks. I just thought of 2 other things. First of all, we drilled the holes with a 2 7/8 inch hole cutting bit, and so they are 2 7/8 inches. That's important so the net cups don't slide down through. But if you cut that size hole in the bottom of the tubs also, they won't go down through. But that's the size that we use for that. And then the other thing is, make certain that you construct all of your whatever number of lines you're going to do and whatever, do all your construction first and then run the plumbing after that. You can't figure out the plumbing and then build this. You've got to build the frame. That's pretty evident, I guess. You've got to build the frame first and then make the plumbing fit what you've just built.